Marcus Williams wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a small streak of engine oil across his dark skin. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the private airport tarmac, and even though it was only 9 in the morning, the temperature was already climbing toward what promised to be another scorching day. He squinted up at the sleek white Gulfstream G650 that towered above him, its polished surface gleaming like a jewel against the clear blue sky. At 28 years old, Marcus had been working on aircraft for nearly a decade, but he still felt a surge of excitement every time he laid hands on a machine this sophisticated. This particular jet belonged to Richard Blackstone, one of the wealthiest men in the country, whose business empire stretched from technology to real estate to aerospace manufacturing. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that he was fixing a plane owned by someone who probably made more money in a single day than Marcus would see in his entire lifetime. The hangar at Phoenix Sky Harbor's private aviation section buzzed with activity, but Marcus had learned to tune out the distractions. His focus was laser sharp when it came to his work. Today's job was particularly challenging, a mysterious engine vibration that had stumped 2 other mechanics before him. The previous technicians had run basic diagnostics and found nothing obvious, but Marcus had a reputation for solving the unsolvable. His supervisor, Jake Morrison, had specifically requested him for this job. "The owner's getting impatient," Jake had warned him earlier. "This is his primary aircraft, and he's got important meetings lined up. Figure out what those other guys missed." Marcus didn't mind the pressure. In fact, he thrived on it. Growing up in South Phoenix, the son of a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, he had learned early that excellence was his ticket to a better life. While other kids his age were getting into trouble on the streets, Marcus spent his afternoons at the local community college's automotive program, soaking up everything he could learn about engines and mechanical systems. His path to aviation hadn't been straightforward. After high school, he'd worked for several years at various auto repair shops, building his reputation as someone who could diagnose problems that left other mechanics scratching their heads. It was pure chance that led him to aircraft maintenance. A friend had mentioned an opening at the airport, and Marcus figured engines were engines, whether they powered cars or planes. That assumption had been both right and spectacularly wrong. Aircraft engines were indeed similar to automotive engines in basic principles, but the precision required, the safety standards, and the complexity of modern aviation systems had challenged him in ways he'd never expected. He'd spent countless hours studying, earning his airframe and power plant license, and gradually working his way up from basic maintenance to complex diagnostics. Now, as he opened his toolbox and began laying out his instruments with practiced efficiency, Marcus felt the familiar calm that came over him when he was about to dive deep into a mechanical puzzle. The Gulfstream's Rolls-Royce engines were works of art in their own right, powerful, sophisticated, and temperamental when something wasn't quite right. He started with a visual inspection, running his hands along the engine, cowling and checking for any signs of wear, loose fasteners, or unusual heat patterns. The morning sun was now hot enough that the metal was warm to the touch, but Marcus had learned to work with heat. His muscular frame, built through years of physical labor and weekend workouts at the local gym, was well suited to the demands of aircraft maintenance. 20 minutes into his inspection, Marcus noticed something the previous mechanics had missed. There was a barely perceptible misalignment in one of the engine mounts, not enough to show up on standard diagnostic equipment, but just enough to create the kind of subtle vibration that would be felt rather than heard. He made a note on his work tablet and continued his examination. "Excuse me, are you the mechanic working on my aircraft?" The voice came from behind him, smooth and cultured with just a hint of curiosity. Marcus straightened up and turned around to find himself face to face with Richard Blackstone himself. He recognized the man immediately from newspaper photos and business magazine covers. Tall, silver-haired, probably in his early 60s, wearing what looked like a custom-tailored suit despite the desert heat. Yes, sir. I'm Marcus Williams, he replied, extending a hand that was clean despite his work, a habit ingrained by years of dealing with clients. I'm looking into the vibration issue your plane's been having. Blackstone shook his hand with a firm grip, his eyes taking in Marcus's appearance with what seemed like genuine interest rather than judgment. I have to admit, I'm impressed by your setup here. Most mechanics I've dealt with don't work with this level of organization. Marcus glanced back at his tool arrangement, every instrument in its place, his tablet positioned for easy reference, his diagnostic equipment neatly arranged. Attention to detail matters, especially with aircraft, he said simply. One small mistake up there can have serious consequences down here. Indeed. Blackstone moved closer to the engine, gesturing toward the open cowling. My previous mechanics ran their diagnostics and assured me everything was within normal parameters. Yet the vibration persists. What's your assessment? It was an unusual situation. In Marcus's experience, aircraft owners rarely engaged directly with maintenance staff. There were usually layers of management, flight crew, and administrative personnel who handled such interactions. Yet here was one of the most powerful men in the country, asking for his professional opinion as if they were equals. Well, sir, I think I may have found something, Marcus said, pointing to the engine mount he'd been examining. There's a slight misalignment here that wouldn't show up on standard vibration analysis, but it could definitely cause the symptoms you're experiencing. It's the kind of thing that develops gradually over time, so gradually that it might not trigger any warning systems. Blackstone leaned in to look where Marcus was pointing. And Marcus noticed that despite his expensive clothing, the man seemed genuinely interested in understanding the mechanical issue. How would something like that happen? Could be a number of factors, Marcus explained, warming to the subject. Metal fatigue from thermal cycling, slight settling in the mounting structure over time, or even just the cumulative effect of thousands of landing cycles. These engines produce enormous forces, and even the smallest changes in alignment can create problems. And you can fix it? Absolutely. It'll require recalibrating the mount points and possibly replacing some hardware, but it's definitely doable. The challenge is doing it precisely enough that we eliminate the vibration without creating any new problems. Blackstone nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. How long have you been working on aircraft? About 6 years now, sir. Started in automotive, but aircraft maintenance is where I found my calling. There's something about the precision required, the safety responsibility. It brings out the best in you, if you're willing to rise to the challenge. I can see that. Blackstone gestured toward Marcus's muscular arms and shoulders. I have to say I'm impressed by your physical conditioning. Most people don't realize how physically demanding precision mechanical work can be. I like your muscles. They speak to someone who takes care of himself and approaches his work with discipline. Marcus felt a moment of surprise at the compliment. In his experience, his physical appearance sometimes worked against him in professional settings, with some people making assumptions about his intelligence or capabilities based on his size and race. But Blackstone's comment seemed entirely sincere and professional, an acknowledgement of the physical demands of quality craftsmanship. Thank you, sir. This kind of work does require both mental focus and physical stamina. When you're working in awkward positions for hours at a time, trying to make precise adjustments in tight spaces, being physically prepared makes a real difference in the quality of your work. I imagine it does. Blackstone checked his watch, a gesture that reminded Marcus of the time pressure surrounding this repair. I have a board meeting in Los Angeles this afternoon. Is this something you can address quickly, or are we looking at a longer timeline? Marcus considered the question carefully. He could probably rush through the repair and have the plane ready in a few hours, but that would mean cutting corners and potentially missing other issues. On the other hand, a thorough job would take most of the day. Sir, I can have your aircraft ready in about 6 hours if I focus exclusively on the vibration issue. However, given that this problem went undiagnosed for several weeks, I'd recommend taking the time to do a comprehensive inspection of all the engine mounts and related systems. It would take until tomorrow morning, but you'd have complete confidence that everything is properly sorted. Blackstone studied Marcus's face for a long moment, as if weighing his options. Most people would tell me what they think I want to hear, that they can have it ready immediately. I appreciate your honesty about the time required to do the job right. Quality work takes the time it takes, sir. I'd rather disappoint you with a timeline than disappoint you with a recurring problem. Fair point. Blackstone made a decision with the kind of quick certainty that Marcus imagined served him well in business. Take the time you need. I'll reschedule my meeting, but I have one condition. Marcus waited, wondering what kind of requirement a billionaire might have for aircraft maintenance. I'd like to observe your work periodically throughout the day, not to interfere or micromanage, but I'm genuinely curious about the process. I've owned aircraft for 15 years, but I've never really understood what goes into maintaining them at this level. It was perhaps the most unusual request Marcus had ever received from a client, but something about Blackstone's manner suggested genuine interest rather than mistrust. Of course, sir. I'd be happy to explain what I'm doing as I work. Excellent. Blackstone extended his hand again. I'll let you get started then. I have some calls to make, but I'll check back in a couple of hours. As Blackstone walked away toward the hangar office, Marcus turned back to his work with a strange sense of anticipation. In his career, he'd repaired aircraft for celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. But he'd rarely interacted with them directly. There was something refreshing about Blackstone's straightforward manner and apparent respect for skilled craftsmanship. He began the careful process of accessing the engine mount assembly, a job that required removing several panels and components to reach the critical adjustment points. Each step had to be documented for maintenance records, and every removed part had to be carefully inspected before being set aside. As he worked, Marcus found himself thinking about the path that had led him to this moment. His mother had always told him that excellence would be recognized eventually, but growing up in their neighborhood, it was hard to believe that hard work alone would be enough. He'd seen too many talented people struggle against circumstances beyond their control, too many dreams deferred by economic necessity or social barriers. Yet here he was, trusted with maintaining one of the most sophisticated aircraft in private aviation, earning the respect of clients who valued his expertise regardless of his background. It wasn't the life he'd originally envisioned. As a kid, he'd dreamed of becoming an engineer, maybe even an astronaut. But it was a life he'd built through determination and skill. The engine mount work was meticulous and physically demanding. Marcus had to contort himself into awkward positions to reach the adjustment points, using his strength to apply precise torque while maintaining perfect alignment. Sweat dripped onto the hangar floor as he worked, but his focus never wavered. Around noon, as he was making final adjustments to the first mount point, he heard footsteps approaching. Blackstone had returned, this time accompanied by a younger woman in business attire who Marcus assumed was an assistant or executive from his company. "How's the progress?" Blackstone asked, genuine interest evident in his voice. Marcus straightened up, wiping his hands on a clean rag. Good news on the first mount. The misalignment was exactly what I thought it was. I've got it corrected and properly torqued. Now I'm moving on to the other 3 mount points to make sure they're all perfectly aligned. May I? Blackstone gestured toward the engine compartment. Absolutely. Marcus guided him to where he could see the work area without interfering with ongoing repairs. What I've done here is reset the mount to factory specifications and verified it with precision measurement tools. The difference is subtle. We're talking about misalignments measured in thousandths of an inch, but at the rotational speeds these engines operate, Even tiny variations get amplified into noticeable vibration. The woman accompanying Blackstone leaned in to look as well. "I'm Sarah Chen, Mr. Blackstone's Chief of Operations," she introduced herself. "This is fascinating. How do you even measure something that precise?" Marcus showed them his digital calipers and alignment tools. Modern measurement technology lets us verify positioning to incredible accuracy. But the real skill is in the setup and adjustment process, making sure that when you tighten everything down, it stays exactly where you positioned it. "The precision required must be extraordinary," Blackstone observed. "I'm beginning to understand why aircraft maintenance commands such respect in the aviation industry." "It's definitely not a field for shortcuts," Marcus agreed. "Every adjustment affects multiple other systems, and everything has to work perfectly under extreme conditions. Temperature variations, vibration, stress cycles. There's no margin for error." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus continued his methodical work, while Blackstone and Sarah observed intermittently. They asked thoughtful questions about the process, the tools, and the engineering principles behind aircraft maintenance. Marcus found himself enjoying the chance to share his expertise with people who seemed genuinely interested in understanding the craft. By late afternoon, he had completed work on 3 of the 4 mount points and was confident that he'd identified and corrected the source of the vibration problem. The 4th mount showed signs of wear that suggested it should be replaced entirely, not immediately critical, but worth addressing to prevent future problems. When Blackstone returned for his final check of the day, Marcus was cleaning up his work area and preparing for the component replacement that would occupy the following morning. "What's the verdict?" Blackstone asked. "The vibration issue is definitely resolved," Marcus reported. "I found misalignments in 3 of the 4 mount points, all within the range that would cause the symptoms you described. However, the 4th mount shows enough wear that I'd recommend replacing it entirely. It's not going to fail tomorrow, but addressing it now will prevent problems down the road." Blackstone nodded approvingly. "I appreciate the thorough approach. What's involved in replacing the mount?" "It's actually the most complex part of the job," Marcus explained. "I'll need to completely remove the engine from its mounting system, replace the worn mount with a new one, and then reinstall everything with perfect alignment. It's about 4 hours of work, but it'll give you complete confidence in the system." "And if we skip that step?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "The mount will probably last another 6 months to a year before it becomes a real problem. But when it does fail, it'll likely cause secondary damage that would be much more expensive to repair. From a risk management perspective, addressing it now makes financial sense." "Then we address it now." Blackstone's decision was immediate and decisive. "I've learned that postponing maintenance to save time usually costs more time in the long run." As they shook hands and Blackstone headed toward his waiting car, Marcus reflected on the unusual nature of the day. In his experience, wealthy clients typically treated maintenance staff as invisible, necessary but unremarkable. Blackstone's genuine interest in the work and respect for craftsmanship had been refreshing and unexpected. More than that, there had been something in Blackstone's manner that suggested he saw Marcus as more than just a mechanic. The comment about his physical conditioning had been oddly personal, but in a way that felt like recognition rather than objectification. It was as if Blackstone recognized the discipline and dedication required to excel in demanding physical work. As Marcus secured his tools and prepared to leave for the day, he found himself looking forward to completing the job tomorrow. It wasn't often that he had the chance to demonstrate his full capabilities to someone who seemed to genuinely appreciate skilled craftsmanship. Tomorrow would give him the opportunity to show that his reputation for solving complex problems was well earned. The sun was setting behind the mountains as Marcus loaded his personal tools into his pickup truck, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. It had been a good day, challenging work, professional recognition, and the satisfaction that came from diagnosing a problem that had stumped others. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but Marcus felt confident that he would rise to meet them. As he drove home through the evening traffic, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened today, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Perhaps it was simply the recognition that his skills were valued by someone whose opinion carried real weight in the business world. Or maybe it was the realization that excellence really could transcend social and economic boundaries. Whatever it was, Marcus Williams felt ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Marcus arrived at the hangar the next morning before sunrise, his thermos of coffee steaming in the cool desert air. The early start wasn't required, but he preferred to tackle complex work when his mind was fresh and the distractions were minimal. Today's task, removing and replacing the engine mount, would demand his complete attention and considerable physical strength. He'd spent part of the previous evening researching the specific mounting system for this Gulfstream model, reviewing technical specifications and best practices. While he was confident in his abilities, Marcus never assumed anything when it came to aircraft maintenance. Every model had its quirks, and understanding those details could mean the difference between a smooth repair and unexpected complications. The hangar was quiet except for the distant hum of air conditioning and the occasional radio chatter from the control tower. Marcus enjoyed these peaceful early hours when he could work without interruption, letting his expertise guide him through complex procedures. He laid out his tools with the same methodical precision he'd shown the day before, checking each instrument and verifying his equipment was properly calibrated. The engine mount replacement would require him to essentially disconnect the engine from its supporting structure, swap out the worn component, and reinstall everything with perfect alignment. It was the kind of job that separated competent mechanics from exceptional ones, requiring not just technical knowledge, but also physical capability, spatial reasoning, and an almost intuitive understanding of how mechanical systems work together. As the sun crested the mountains and light began flooding through the hangar's high windows, Marcus heard the sound of approaching footsteps. He looked up to see Richard Blackstone walking toward the aircraft, dressed more casually than the previous day in khaki pants and a polo shirt, but still carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command. "Good morning, Marcus. I hope you don't mind me stopping by early. I wanted to see this process from the beginning." "Not at all, sir. I was just getting started." Marcus gestured toward the engine compartment, where he'd already begun removing access panels. "This is definitely the most complex part of the repair, so if you're interested in understanding aircraft maintenance, this is a good procedure to observe." Blackstone moved closer, his expression alert and engaged. "I have to admit, I'm curious about something. Yesterday you mentioned that most mechanics wouldn't have caught the misalignment that caused the vibration. What made you look for something the others missed?" It was a thoughtful question, and Marcus paused to consider his answer. Experience plays a part, but honestly, it's mostly about listening. Not just with your ears, but with your whole body. When you've worked on enough engines, you develop a sense for what's normal and what isn't. The vibration pattern on your aircraft had a specific quality that suggested a mounting issue rather than an internal engine problem. That sounds almost intuitive. In a way, it is, but that intuition is built on thousands of hours of hands-on experience. Every engine tells a story through its sounds, vibrations, and behavior patterns. Learning to read those stories is what separates good mechanics from great ones. As Marcus spoke, he continued working, his hands moving with practiced efficiency through the preliminary disassembly process. Blackstone watched with obvious fascination as Marcus removed components with careful precision, labeling and organizing each part for reassembly. "The physical demands of this work are more significant than I realized," Blackstone observed, noting how Marcus had to use considerable strength to manipulate heavy components while maintaining precise control. It definitely requires conditioning, Marcus agreed, pausing to position a support jack under a particularly heavy section. People sometimes think mechanical work is just about tools and technical knowledge, but your body is really your primary instrument. Strength, endurance, hand-eye coordination, spatial awareness, they all come into play. I can see that. You move with the kind of confidence that comes from genuine physical capability. Blackstone's tone carried a note of professional respect. In my business, I've learned to recognize when someone has the complete skill set for demanding work. You clearly have both the intellectual and physical tools for this profession. Marcus felt a surge of pride at the recognition. Throughout his career, he'd encountered people who seemed surprised that someone with his physical presence could also possess sophisticated technical knowledge. Blackstone's comments suggested he understood that excellence in skilled trades required the integration of multiple capabilities. Thank you, sir. I've always believed that if you're going to do something, you should develop every aspect of what makes you good at it. Physical conditioning, technical education, professional discipline, they all reinforce each other. As the morning progressed, Marcus worked through the complex process of engine disconnection, explaining each step to Blackstone, who proved to be an attentive and insightful observer. The billionaire asked questions that demonstrated both curiosity and a genuine attempt to understand the engineering principles involved. This level of precision must require considerable mental focus, Blackstone noted as Marcus made minute adjustments to ensure perfect alignment during the disconnection process. Absolutely. One small mistake here could create problems that wouldn't show up until the aircraft is already in flight. That's why aircraft maintenance attracts people who can maintain concentration under pressure. And you enjoy that pressure? Marcus considered the question while continuing his work. I do. There's something satisfying about knowing that lives depend on the quality of your work. It brings out the best in you, forces you to operate at your highest level. Not everyone is suited for that kind of responsibility, but for those who are, it's incredibly rewarding. By mid-morning, Marcus had successfully removed the engine from its mounting points, a procedure that had required both careful planning and considerable physical effort. The worn mount was now accessible, and Marcus could see that his diagnosis had been correct. The component showed clear signs of fatigue that would have eventually led to failure. There's the problem, he said, pointing out the stress patterns and wear indicators to Blackstone. You can see how the metal has begun to deform under repeated stress cycles. It's not dramatic, but it's definitely beyond acceptable limits. Blackstone leaned in to examine the component, nodding as Marcus explained the failure patterns. How long would this have lasted if left untreated? Hard to say exactly, but probably 6 to 12 months before it became a safety issue. The good news is that we caught it before any secondary damage occurred. If this mount had failed completely, it could have damaged other engine components that would be much more expensive to replace. So, this repair actually saves money in the long run. Exactly. Preventive maintenance is almost always more cost-effective than emergency repairs. As Marcus began the installation of the new mount, Blackstone received a phone call that took him away for about an hour. Marcus welcomed the uninterrupted work time, as the installation required absolute concentration to ensure proper alignment and torque specifications. When Blackstone returned, he was accompanied by Sarah Chen and another man Marcus hadn't met previously. Younger, probably in his early 30s, wearing expensive casual clothes and carrying himself with an air of casual arrogance that contrasted sharply with Blackstone's respectful manner. Marcus, I'd like you to meet my son, David, Blackstone said, his tone neutral, but something in his expression suggesting this introduction might be complicated. David Blackstone looked Marcus up and down with obvious skepticism. So you're the mechanic who's supposedly going to solve the problem that stumped our regular maintenance crew? The dismissive tone was immediately apparent, and Marcus felt the familiar tension that came with encountering someone who had already made assumptions about his capabilities. "I'm working on replacing a worn engine mount that was causing vibration issues," he replied evenly. "Right." David's skepticism was clear. "And this couldn't wait for our usual maintenance facility because I requested that Marcus handle the repair personally," Richard Blackstone interjected, his voice carrying a slight edge. He identified the problem quickly and proposed a comprehensive solution. David shrugged, clearly unconvinced. "I'm sure it's fine. Though I have to say, Dad, I'm not sure why you're spending so much time observing routine maintenance. Don't you have people to handle these details?" The comment hung in the air awkwardly, and Marcus focused on his work, trying to avoid becoming involved in what seemed like a family dynamic. He'd encountered David's type before, people who had never done physical work themselves and seemed to view it as beneath serious consideration. "I'm observing because I'm learning something valuable about the difference between competent work and exceptional work," Richard replied calmly. "Marcus has demonstrated expertise that goes well beyond routine maintenance." "If you say so." David's attention had already shifted to his phone, clearly considering the conversation finished. As the father and son moved off to discuss other matters, Sarah Chen lingered behind. "Don't mind David," she said quietly to Marcus. "He's never had to work with his hands for anything, so he doesn't understand what skill looks like in practical applications." Marcus nodded appreciatively. "I've met the type before. Some people only respect expertise if it comes with a college degree and an office. Richard isn't like that, though. He built his business from the ground up, and he has tremendous respect for skilled craftsmanship. That's why he's been so interested in your work. I've noticed. It's refreshing to work for someone who understands that quality takes time and skill." Sarah smiled. "He's also been impressed by your professional manner and obvious competence. Between you and me, he's mentioned that you represent the kind of work ethic and attention to detail he wishes he saw more often in his business operations." The comment surprised Marcus, but before he could respond, Sarah had rejoined the others, leaving him to process this information while continuing his work. It was unusual enough for a client to take personal interest in maintenance procedures, but even more unusual for that interest to extend to observations about work ethic and professional character. The afternoon brought its own challenges as Marcus worked through the precise reinstallation process. Every connection had to be perfect, every torque specification exactly right, every alignment checked and double-checked. It was meticulous work that required both technical knowledge and physical precision. David Blackstone returned periodically throughout the afternoon, each time seeming more skeptical about the time and attention being devoted to what he clearly considered routine maintenance. His comments became increasingly pointed. "How much longer is this going to take?" he asked during one visit. "We could have had the plane at a proper maintenance facility and back in service by now." Marcus bit back his initial response and answered professionally. "I'm about 2 hours away from completion. The process takes time, because everything has to be perfect." "Right. Well, I hope all this extra attention is actually necessary." Richard Blackstone, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "David, why don't you wait for me in the office? I'd like to watch Marcus complete the final installation steps." After David left with obvious irritation, Richard turned to Marcus with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry about my son's attitude. He's never had to earn respect for his work, so he doesn't always recognize it in others." "No need to apologize, sir. I've worked for all types over the years." "Still, I want you to know that I appreciate both your technical expertise and your professional demeanor. It's rare to find someone who combines skill, work ethic, and character the way you do." The compliment was unexpected and meaningful, coming from someone of Blackstone's stature. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." As Marcus completed the final installation steps, Blackstone continued to observe with keen interest. "Tell me something, Marcus. Do you ever think about expanding beyond aircraft maintenance? Your problem-solving abilities and attention to detail would be valuable in many other fields." It was an interesting question, and Marcus paused to consider it while making his final adjustments. "I've thought about it, but honestly, I love what I do. There's something satisfying about working with precision machinery, solving complex problems and knowing that people's safety depends on your work. Not everyone finds their calling, but I think I've found mine." "That's admirable. Though I have to say, someone with your capabilities could probably write his own ticket in a lot of industries." "Maybe. But I'd rather be excellent at something I'm passionate about than just competent at something that pays better." Blackstone nodded thoughtfully. "That's a wise perspective, though it raises an interesting question about opportunity and recognition." Before Marcus could ask what he meant by that, the final installation was complete. He ran through his checklist, verifying that every component was properly installed, torqued, and aligned. The repair that had begun the previous day was finally finished. "What's next?" Blackstone asked. "Now we test everything," Marcus replied, beginning to close up the access panels. "I'll run the engine through a series of checks to verify that the vibration is eliminated and that all systems are operating properly. If everything looks good, your aircraft will be ready for service." The test procedures went flawlessly. The engine ran smoothly, with none of the subtle vibration that had plagued the aircraft for weeks. Marcus verified that all his work met or exceeded manufacturer specifications and that the repair would hold up under the demanding conditions of regular flight operations. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the hangar in warm golden light, Marcus completed his final paperwork and began packing up his tools. It had been a satisfying 2 days. Challenging work completed to the highest standards, professional recognition from a discerning client, and the deep satisfaction that came from solving a problem that had stumped others. Blackstone approached as Marcus was loading his toolbox. "Outstanding work, Marcus. I have to ask, what do you see as your long-term career goals?" It was a surprisingly personal question, but Marcus sensed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. "Honestly, sir, I'd like to continue developing my expertise in aircraft maintenance, maybe eventually start my own specialized shop focusing on high-end repairs. There's always more to learn in this field, and I enjoy the challenge of staying current with new technologies." "That's an ambitious goal. Starting a business requires capital, connections, and reputation. How do you plan to bridge that gap?" Marcus hesitated, unsure how much personal information was appropriate to share. "It'll take time to build up the resources and client base, but I figure if you do excellent work consistently, opportunities eventually present themselves." "They do indeed," Blackstone said with a slight smile, "sometimes from unexpected directions." As they shook hands and Blackstone headed toward his waiting car, Marcus felt the same sense of anticipation he'd experienced the previous evening. There was something in Blackstone's manner that suggested their interaction wasn't completely finished, though Marcus couldn't imagine what additional business they might have. Driving home through the desert evening, Marcus reflected on the past 2 days. The technical work had been satisfying, but the unexpected recognition and respect from someone of Blackstone's caliber had been equally meaningful. In a profession where excellence was often taken for granted, it was rare to have your capabilities truly seen and appreciated. Whatever came next, Marcus knew that these 2 days had marked something significant in his career. He had demonstrated his abilities to someone who clearly understood the difference between competent work and true expertise. That recognition, whatever it might lead to, was worth more than any simple payment for services rendered. As the city lights began to twinkle in the distance and the desert cooled around him, Marcus Williams drove toward home with the quiet satisfaction of work well done and possibilities yet to be discovered. 3 weeks later, Marcus was deep under the hood of a corporate helicopter when Jake Morrison approached with an envelope in his hand. The look on his supervisor's face was a mixture of curiosity and concern. "This was delivered for you personally," Jake said, handing over the thick cream-colored envelope. "From Blackstone Industries. What kind of business do you have with them beyond the repair work?" Marcus wiped his hands clean before accepting the envelope, noting the elegant letterhead and his name written in formal script. "I have no idea," he replied honestly. "The repair job went well, but that was finished weeks ago." Inside the envelope was a formal letter requesting his presence at a meeting the following day at Blackstone Industries headquarters. The letter was signed by Richard Blackstone himself and included a note that Marcus should plan for the meeting to last several hours. There was no indication of what the meeting might concern. "This is unusual," Jake observed, reading over Marcus's shoulder. "Billionaires don't generally request personal meetings with mechanics unless something significant is happening." Marcus folded the letter carefully, his mind racing through possibilities. Had there been a problem with his repair work? Some kind of follow-up issue with the aircraft? But if that were the case, the meeting would likely be with lawyers or insurance representatives, not with Blackstone himself. That evening, Marcus called his mother to tell her about the mysterious meeting. Carmen Williams had worked hard her entire life to give her son opportunities, and she had followed his career with fierce pride and protective concern. "Baby, this sounds important," she said over the phone. "You make sure you dress professionally and speak up for yourself. You're as good as anybody, and don't let anyone make you think otherwise." "I know, Mom. I just can't figure out what he wants to meet about. The job was finished perfectly. No problems, no complaints." "Maybe it's not about problems. Maybe it's about possibilities. You always said that if you did excellent work, opportunities would come. Maybe this is one of those opportunities." Marcus spent the rest of the evening researching Blackstone Industries, learning about Richard Blackstone's business empire and his reputation for identifying and developing talent. The company had interests in aerospace manufacturing, technology development, and private aviation services. Several news articles mentioned Blackstone's practice of promoting from within and his belief that practical experience often trumped formal credentials. The next morning, Marcus drove to the gleaming downtown headquarters of Blackstone Industries, a 40-story tower of glass and steel that dominated the Phoenix skyline. The building's lobby was an impressive display of modern architecture and corporate success, with expensive materials and carefully curated art that spoke to serious money and refined taste. At the reception desk, he was expected and quickly escorted to an elevator that whisked him to the 38th floor. The elevator opened onto a spacious suite of offices with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered spectacular views of the desert and mountains beyond. Sarah Chen greeted him with a warm smile and led him to a conference room where Richard Blackstone was waiting, along with two other people Marcus didn't recognize: a woman in her 50s who carried herself with executive authority, and a younger man with the focused intensity of a technical specialist. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Blackstone said, standing to shake hands. "I'd like you to meet Patricia Hendricks, my Vice President of Operations, and James Liu, who heads our Aviation Services Division." As they settled around the conference table, Marcus felt a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. This was clearly something more significant than a follow-up conversation about aircraft maintenance. "Marcus, I'll get straight to the point," Blackstone began. "Over the past few weeks, I've been thinking about our interaction during your repair work on my aircraft. Your technical expertise was impressive, but what really caught my attention was your approach to problem-solving, your work ethic, and your professional character." Patricia Hendricks leaned forward slightly. "We've been looking for someone to head up a new division focused on specialized aircraft maintenance and modification. The position would involve managing a team of technicians, working directly with high-end clients, and developing protocols for complex maintenance challenges." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. This was far beyond anything he had imagined when he received the meeting request. That sounds like an incredible opportunity, but I have to ask, why me? I don't have management experience or formal engineering credentials. That's exactly why James Liu spoke for the first time. We've tried filling similar positions with people who had impressive resumes but lacked practical expertise. The result was managers who couldn't earn the respect of their technical teams and couldn't properly assess the quality of complex work. Blackstone nodded. What we learned is that in highly skilled technical fields, leadership credibility comes from demonstrated competence, not just formal education. You showed me that you can solve problems others can't, work with precision under pressure, and maintain professional standards even when dealing with difficult personalities. The reference to David's behavior during the repair work wasn't lost on Marcus. I appreciate your confidence, but this would be a major career transition for me. Which is why we're prepared to support that transition, Patricia explained. The package would include management training, business development education, and a salary that reflects the responsibility. You'd be building something new, with the autonomy to establish best practices and hire your own team. Marcus felt the weight of the opportunity settling on him. This was the kind of chance his mother had always told him would come if he worked hard and maintained his integrity. Yet it also represented a leap into unfamiliar territory that would require him to develop skills far beyond his technical expertise. Can I ask what made you think I could handle the business and management aspects of this role? Blackstone smiled. During our conversations, you demonstrated strategic thinking about maintenance planning, cost-benefit analysis, and risk assessment. You also showed the ability to communicate complex technical concepts to non-technical people. Those are exactly the skills required for effective management in technical fields. Plus, Sarah Chen added, you handled David's skepticism with grace and professionalism. That kind of interpersonal skill is rare in highly technical fields. Marcus took a deep breath, processing the magnitude of what was being offered. What would be the timeline for something like this? We'd want you to start within 60 days, Patricia replied. The first 6 months would be spent establishing the division, developing protocols, and beginning to build your team. We already have a facility identified and initial clients lined up. The position would be based here in Phoenix, James added, but you'd travel to client sites throughout the Southwest. You'd be handling aircraft for celebrities, executives, and government agencies, essentially the most demanding clients in private aviation. It was everything Marcus had dreamed of when he'd thought about eventually starting his own business, but accelerated and backed by the resources of a major corporation. Yet the scale of the opportunity was almost overwhelming. I have to be honest, Marcus said carefully. This is far beyond anything I've prepared for. I've never managed people, never dealt with major corporate clients, never been responsible for business operations. Which is exactly why you're perfect for the job, Blackstone replied. You understand that you don't know everything, which means you'll learn what you need to learn. Most importantly, you have the technical credibility and work ethic that can't be taught. Patricia opened a folder and slid a document across the table. This is a preliminary offer outlining the position, salary, benefits, and support structure. We'd like you to take it home, discuss it with your family, and let us know your decision within a week. Marcus picked up the document, his eyes widening at the salary figure. It was more than double what he currently made, with benefits and equity participation that could set him up for long-term financial security. There's one more thing, Blackstone said, his tone becoming more personal. I want you to understand that this offer is based on my assessment of your character as much as your capabilities. During our interaction, you demonstrated integrity, humility, and genuine expertise. Those qualities are rare at any level of business. I saw how you handled pressure, how you communicated with respect regardless of how you were treated, and how you took pride in excellence for its own sake, Sarah added. Those are the foundation qualities for effective leadership. As the meeting concluded and Marcus prepared to leave, Blackstone walked him to the elevator. "Marcus, I want you to know that I see tremendous potential in you. This opportunity could be the beginning of a career path that goes well beyond what either of us can imagine right now. I'm honored by your confidence, sir. I just want to make sure I can live up to it." "The fact that you're concerned about living up to it tells me that you will," Blackstone replied with a smile. "Excellence is a habit, not an accident. You've already demonstrated that habit." As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Marcus felt as if his entire world had shifted. That morning, he had been a skilled mechanic with modest ambitions. Now he was contemplating a leadership role that could transform his entire future. Driving home through the afternoon traffic, Marcus called his mother to share the news. Her reaction was immediate and emotional. "Baby, this is what we've been working toward your whole life," she said, tears evident in her voice. "You deserve this opportunity, and you're going to succeed because you know how to work and you know how to treat people right." That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table reviewing the offer document in detail. The salary and benefits were generous, but what impressed him most was the structure of the position: real autonomy, resources to build something meaningful, and the backing of an organization that clearly valued practical expertise. Over the following days, Marcus talked the opportunity through with mentors, colleagues, and friends. Everyone encouraged him to accept, recognizing that such opportunities were rare and that his combination of technical skill and character made him uniquely qualified. A week later, Marcus returned to Blackstone Industries to accept the position. The meeting was brief but warm, with handshakes and congratulations from the executive team who would now be his colleagues. "Welcome to Blackstone Industries," Richard said as they concluded the paperwork. "I'm excited to see what you build here." "Thank you for seeing potential in me that I'm not sure I saw in myself," Marcus replied honestly. "That's what good leadership is about, recognizing capabilities in others and creating opportunities for those capabilities to flourish. I have a feeling you're going to excel at that." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the gleaming new facility that housed Blackstone Aviation Services, watching his team of skilled technicians work on a variety of high-end aircraft. The division had exceeded all initial projections, earning recognition for both technical excellence and customer service. His office overlooked the work floor, and Marcus made it a point to spend time daily with his technicians, maintaining the hands-on expertise that had brought him to this position. He had learned to balance the demands of management with his love of practical problem-solving, and had discovered that developing other people's capabilities was as satisfying as solving complex technical challenges himself. The transformation in his life had been remarkable, but Marcus never forgot the moment that started it all. Working under the desert sun on Richard Blackstone's aircraft, demonstrating the kind of excellence that had caught the attention of someone who understood the value of genuine expertise. On quiet evenings, Marcus often reflected on the path that had led him from a modest background to a position of real influence and opportunity. It had been built on the foundation his mother had given him, the belief that excellence would be recognized, that character mattered, and that hard work could open doors to possibilities beyond imagination. The comment that had started it all, "I like your muscles," had been Richard Blackstone's way of recognizing that true expertise required both intellectual capability and physical discipline. It was an acknowledgement that the best craftspeople integrated multiple forms of strength, and that such integration deserved respect and opportunity. As Marcus looked out over his thriving operation, he understood that the real strength Blackstone had recognized wasn't just physical. It was the strength of character that drove someone to pursue excellence regardless of recognition, to maintain professionalism under pressure, and to take pride in work that might go unnoticed by most of the world. That strength had built a career, created opportunities for others, and proven that talent and character could indeed transcend the circumstances of birth. It was a lesson Marcus would carry forward as he continued to build something meaningful, something that honored both the skills he had developed and the opportunities he had been given. The desert sun that had beaten down on him during those 2 days of aircraft maintenance now streamed through the windows of his executive office, illuminating a future that had been built on the solid foundation of excellence, integrity, and the courage to rise to unexpected challenges. Marcus Williams had found his calling, and in finding it, had discovered that the greatest strength of all was the ability to recognize and develop the potential in others, just as Richard Blackstone had recognized and developed the potential in him.